We earlier made the comment in the previous video that chapter 46 and 47 of Isaiah complement each other. They sort of tell two halves of the same story, which is the humiliation and the humbling of Babylon. In the previous chapter 46, it was about the humbling of Babylon's gods, and that led God to turn to his people and say, these gods, these idols of men are going to be embarrassed, and the people who follow them will be defeated. Don't you fall into the same trap and follow gods. Instead, turn to me. Similar thought comes in here in chapter 47, where God focuses on the empire of Babylon as a power and how they too will be humiliated. And it starts with God telling them how he's going to put them in their place and greatly diminish them from their stature as a world leader. In verse 1 of chapter 47, God says, "Come down and sit in the dust, O virgin daughter of Babylon. Sit on the ground. There is no throne, O daughter of the Chaldeans, for thou shalt no more be called tender and delicate." He describes Babylon not as a stout, mighty warrior, which is probably the way they would like to picture themselves, but rather as a delicate flower, this innocent, soft, and fragile little girl that is sitting up on high and doesn't even realize the danger that is all around her because she has been protected for a long time, that God has been the one behind the scenes orchestrating her rise for the purposes of putting his people in captivity. But as we'll find out later, that captivity is going to come to an end, and so will Babylon's time in the sun. And their perfect little empire is going to be defeated. Their fragile state will be exposed as fragile. They're a mirage. They believe that they are great, strong, and powerful, but they are really tiny and small. God has just propped them up. And once he takes away the props, they're going to fall. So he tells them, you're going to sit in the dust, which is the dirt, which is the ground, where the lowest slaves and servants sit. They don't get the privilege of furniture. You're going to become a servant, you virgin daughter of Babylon. You're going to sit on the ground, not in a throne, daughter of the Chaldeans. No more will you be called tender and delicate. Well, who's calling them that? God is. And he's going to take away their tenderness and their delicateness. Verse 2. Take the millstones and grind meal. You virgin daughter, you're going to be made to work now. You're not going to sit on your throne and dictate to other people from on high. Now you're going to be brought low. So you're going to be making bread, grinding the meal together. Uncover your locks, make bare the leg, uncover the thigh, and pass over the rivers. Let down your hair and hike up your skirt, Babylon, because you, young lady, are going to have to cross the river over into Persia when you go to captivity. Your nakedness shall be uncovered. Your shame shall be seen. You think you are great and big and powerful. I'm going to expose you and show the world just how small and fragile you are. You're not a big, strong man. I'm going to take vengeance on you, and I will not meet you as I meet a man. I'm not going to come to you like a coming to an equal. I'm not going to approach you like a big, strong, powerful adversary. I'm going to slap you down and smack you down like you were a fragile, tiny, insignificant speck of dust. A speck of dirt, a worm on the ground, a fly to be swatted away. Verse 4. As for our Redeemer, the Lord of hosts is his name, the Holy One of Israel. It seems almost like Isaiah has interjected himself into this narrative of God, who has been the speaker for the previous verses and will be soon after. Obviously, God's not speaking of himself in the third person. He doesn't typically do that without saying, I am the Lord. But here it's like Isaiah is interjected in verse 4. The empire of Babylon is going to fall, but we rely on God, he says to his people. They will eventually be reading this in captivity. As for our Redeemer, the Lord of hosts is his name, the Holy One of Israel is who he is, and that's who we should follow. And so the Judean people in captivity of Babylon will read this text and will be able to draw comfort from it. And if they trust God, they will survive their captive time in Babylon and head off to Persia to eventually be freed. Verse 5, God resumes, Sit thou silent, and get thee into darkness, O daughter of the Chaldeans, for thou shalt no more be called the lady of kingdoms. You will no more be the queen of the earth, the queen of the empires of the earth. Now you're going to sit on the ground in silence and in the darkness, O daughter of the Chaldeans. You're going to be humbled, your great stature and power taken away from you. Whether you like it or not, your time in the sun is done. Verse 6, God says, I was wroth with my people. I have polluted mine inheritance. I have given them into thine hand. Thou didst show them no mercy. Upon the ancient hast thou verily laid the yoke. God says, I used you, Babylon, propped you up, made you powerful, because my people were wicked, and I was wroth against them, angry against them. So I used you to punish them. But you abused them. You were wicked and cruel to them. You were not right and fair as a conqueror of a nation ought to be. Instead, you showed them no mercy, he says, to the ancient, to the even elderly people, the poor and the weakest of society that you conquered. He says, you very heavily laid your yoke. In other words, you were extra hard on them who were the weakest. Don't tell me God doesn't care the way a nation treats its citizens. Certainly he clearly does. Verse 7, and thou hast said, I shall be a lady forever, so that thou did not lay these things to your heart, neither did you remember the latter end of it. You, however, had the audacity to think you could treat your citizens, even your captive ones, however you want, and have the audacity to think, I'm a lady, I'm the queen of the kingdoms of the earth, and I'll be that way forever. Never mind the fact that you had to knock off the previous queen of the kingdoms to become that. And just like they had to knock off their previous queen of the kingdoms. Someone always falls. Kingdoms always fall. It's foolishness. And it's a blindness to history, as he says. You didn't remember the latter end of it. It's a blindness to history to think that your kingdom will be the one that stands forever. Every kingdom, every empire, every world power always falls. Verse 8, therefore hear now this, thou art given to pleasures that dwells carelessly, you who live without a care in the world, who's given yourself to just a life of pleasure and sinfulness. He says, you say in your heart, I am and none else beside me. I shall not sit as a widow, neither shall I know the loss of children. You who arrogantly think that you stand alone on the earth, that you are untouchable, that you will never be defeated and left alone, a widow with no children. God can say about himself, I am and there's none else beside me. No kingdom on earth can make that claim, however. Verse 9, but these two things shall come to thee in a moment one day. What two things? What he had just said, being a widow without children. And he repeats it here in verse 9. The loss of children and widowhood. Those two things that you think could never happen will happen. That you'll never be left alone, stripped of all that makes you worthwhile. Instead you will be. And they will come upon thee in their perfection. You will be completely and totally defeated. You won't just stumble into this. It won't just be a run of bad luck. You can't blame this on circumstances. This is God's doing. All the way through and through. For the multitude of thy sorcerers and for thy great abundance of thine enchantments, all of your sorceries and your superstitions and your confidence in gods and idols, none of it will be able to help you. It's all smoke and mirrors. It has no real power against God. For thou hast trusted, verse 10, in thy wickedness. Thou hast said, none sees me. Thy wisdom and thy knowledge, it has perverted thee. Remember how he earlier promised to bring down Nebo, the God of wisdom, whom they trusted in. They thought because we have an idol that we call the God of wisdom, that somehow because we have him in our possession, that we're wise. You have wisdom and knowledge, Babylon, but it perverted you. You thought that you were inherently wise and not just someone who had learned and studied and grew in knowledge and stature. Instead, you were arrogant with what you knew, and your wisdom and knowledge perverted you. Into verse 10, and you said within your heart, I am, and none else beside me. Well, you're not God, and you're fixing to be shown that. Verse 11, therefore shall evil come upon thee. Thou shalt not know from whence it rises, and mischief shall fall upon thee. Thou shalt not be able to put it off, and desolation shall come upon thee suddenly, which thou shalt not know. Three things, very similar, each of them, that God promises them. But with each of them, he puts a little coda on them, a little tag. He says, evil will come upon you, hard times. Then he says, and you shall not know from where it comes. You say you're so wise, you won't see this coming, you wise people. Mischief will fall upon you. That's the word that these pagans used for when their gods were angry at them and bad things happened. And they said, oh, the gods are angry. This is a time of calamity. Mischief will come, but not from your gods, rather from God. It shall fall upon you, and you will not be able to put it off. You say you're so wise and so smart, but you won't be able to outthink this problem, outsmart it and maneuver around it. Then he says, desolation shall come upon thee suddenly, a complete devastation of your culture and your customs, but you shall not know it. It will take you by surprise, yet you're supposed to be so knowledgeable and wise. I thought you guys were all alone and none else beside you. Clearly someone is at least on your level, if not greater, and that's God. Verse 12, stand now, with thine enchantments, God mocks them. Stand up, show me all of your enchantments, all of your sorcerers, which you've labored from your youth, if so be that they shall be able to profit, so that you may prevail. Show me all of your enchantments. Show me all of your sorcerers. Bring me all of your superstitious ways. Let's see if they can stand up against God. And of course they can't. You are wearied, verse 13, in the multitude of thy counsels. Let now the astrologers, the stargazers, and the monthly prognosticators stand up and save thee from these things that shall come upon thee. God is challenging them, daring them to throw at him their best shot. Give me your three primary religious teachers. You've got your astrologers, the people who look to the movements of the stars and try to discern messages from the heavens. You have your stargazers, the people who look at the patterns and constellations of the stars and try to find the messages from the heavens there. And you have your monthly prognosticators, those who study the cycle of the moon and think that there is some great divine message coming from them. So you take all of your superstitious people and stand them up against me. Let's see if they can devise a plan that can save you from me. 14. God says, behold, they shall be as stubble. They will be kindling in the fire that will burn up your empire. And the fire shall burn them. They shall not deliver themselves from the power of the flame. There shall not be a coal to warm at, nor fire to sit before it. Look at the way the metaphor is mixed in this verse. God says you have all of your astrologers and stargazers and prognosticators. You have them all before you as a shield to protect you. But they're not a shield. They're kindling that I will use to start the fire that ignites the flame that burns up Babylon. And then he mixes his metaphor, and after he says Babylon will be burned down and no one will be delivered from it, he says this fire that burns you will not warm you. It will not allow you to sit before it. In other words, though it's a great fire, there's nothing positive to come out of it. You won't be able to say, well, the kingdom is on fire, but at least I can warm myself at night. No, this fire will consume you. So you won't be able to warm yourself by it and sit beside it and relax. This fire will destroy you totally. Thus, verse 15, shall they be unto thee with whom thou hast labored, even thy merchants from thy youth. They shall wander every one to his quarter, none shall save thee. Every one of Babylon's citizens will just wander the earth, the quarter, the four corners of the earth. And they will be as defeated and as diminished as the traveling merchants with whom Babylon dealt as an empire. You're going to be a reduced power. Now, the time he says this, Babylon was a small but rising power. Not nearly what they will be. God is already looking past their peak to their twilight and their ultimate and very final destruction at his hands. But these two chapters that we looked at before and here, chapter 46 and 47, sum up the overall power of God over men. The men who make idols and the idols themselves, and the kingdoms that foolishly worship those idols. Both will be humbled, humiliated, and ultimately defeated at the hand of God. It's right then that God would turn his attention once more to his people, as he does in chapter 48, and invites them once more to come to the one true God that can save them. We'll look at chapter 48 next time. Until then, thank you very much.